Hello and welcome back to the Property Auctions Podcast with me, Dominic Farrell, author of the UK's #1 best-selling book for property auctions. Today's episode is about one of the most important skills in auction buying: setting your maximum bid. Not guessing it, not feeling it, not deciding it during the auction when your heart rate is up and someone else is bidding against you. Setting it properly in advance based on the numbers, the risks, and the reality of what you are buying. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about property auctions. Most people don't lose money because they bought a bad property. They lose money because they paid the wrong price. And I see it almost weekly. A difficult property can still be a good purchase if the price is right. A short lease, a sitting tenant, a defective title, even structural issues, a messy legal pack, a refurbishment project, even a property that has failed to sell before. And by the way, many of these are excellent opportunities. None of these things automatically make it a bad deal, but they all have to be priced. And that is the theme of today's episode. Your maximum bid is not just the number you like. It is not the guide price plus a bit. It is not what someone else paid for something similar 6 months ago. And it's not what you can afford to borrow. Your maximum bid is the highest price you can pay while still being properly compensated for the risk you are taking. That is the whole property auctions game. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how to calculate that number, why the guide price is usually the wrong place to start, and how legal pack risks affect the bid, and why discipline matters more than enthusiasm. So let's start with the guide price. One of the biggest mistakes new auction buyers make is treating the guide price as if it represents value. The guide price is a marketing number. It is there to generate interest. It is there to get people clicking, viewing, downloading legal packs, getting excited, and registering to bid. Sometimes the guide price is close to where the property might sell. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a deliberately low price to create competition. That is critical. Don't be taken in by it. Sometimes, though, it reflects a serious issue that is not obvious until you read the legal pack. Sometimes it is based on a reserve price that may move. And sometimes it's just not very useful at all. So the first rule is this: do not start with the guide price. Start with the end value. What is the property actually worth when your plan has completed? That's what you're prepared to pay. That might mean the resale value after refurb. It might mean the investment value once let. It might mean the value after a lease extension. It might mean the vacant possession value if you're buying something tenanted. It might mean the value once a title issue has been resolved. But you start at the end. Because when you buy at auction, you're not buying a dream. You're buying a chain of costs, risks, delays, and possible outcomes. And the only way to work backwards to a safe bid is to understand the most realistic endpoint. So let's imagine a simple example. You find a property listed with a guide price of £150,000. Similar refurbished houses in the area appear to be selling for around £240,000. A beginner might think, wow, that's great. There's a £90,000 margin there. But there isn't, because between £150,000 and £240,000 sits the real world. There's stamp duty, land tax, SDLT. There are auction fees. There are legal fees. You'll be paying your own legal fees, and in most cases, paying the seller's legal fees. There may be a buyer's premium, and there may be additional fees and costs within the special conditions of sale. Then there are finance costs, there are insurance costs, there's council tax, utilities, there's a refurb, there are delays, there are unknowns, there's cost of selling, and then there's your profit. One thing to remember, you must ensure that if the property is tenanted, then there are no rent arrears. If there are, you need to have it in writing that you're not responsible for them. So the question is not, can I buy this for less than it might be worth? The question is, after every cost, every risk, and every delay, is there enough margin left to make this worth doing? That is a very different question. Let's break the calculation down into 5 parts. Number 1, the end value. Number 2, the works cost. Number 3, the transaction and holding costs. Number 4, the risk allowance. And number 5, your required profit or margin. Once you have those, you can work backwards to your maximum bid. Let's go through each one. First, the end value. This is where many auction calculations go wrong before they've even started. People often use the highest comparable sale they can find. They look at the best houses on the best streets in the best condition, and they use that as their future value. There's danger in that. The end value should be realistic, not optimistic. You want to look at actual sold prices, not just asking prices. You want to compare like with like, same property type, similar size, similar condition after works, similar location, parking, garden, lease length, layout, and tenure. If the best comparable sold for £240,000 but had an extension, off-street parking, and a larger plot, then your property may not be worth $240,000 when finished. Maybe it's worth $225,000, maybe it's even less at $215,000. That difference can destroy the deal. A £15,000 overestimate on value is not a small error. It comes straight out of your profit. And in auctions, where margins are often thinner than people think, that can be the difference between a sensible purchase and an expensive lesson. So be conservative with the end value. Not negative, not fearful, just realistic. Second, works cost. This is another area where people get the numbers badly wrong. They look at a tied property and say it needs about 20 grand spending on it. But what does that mean? Does it need a new kitchen, bathroom, rewire, boiler, roof repairs, damp works, windows, plastering, flooring, decoration, garden clearance, waste removal, structural repairs, building control approval, fire safety works, HMO compliance, leasehold consent? A refurbishment budget should not be a round number invented from looking at the photos. And indeed, certainly don't take any of the AI recommendations which are based on photos. The ones I've seen are wildly out. Now, the number should be built from the actual work required. And if you cannot inspect the property properly, or if access is limited, or if the photos are poor, or if there are signs of neglect, then you need a larger contingency. I believe you shouldn't buy a property at auction unless you've inspected it. You can only take so much information from a photograph or even a video. You need to go in and smell the property. You need to go and put your foot into the floorboards, touch walls, and get a general feel for it. And I don't think you can do that from photos and videos. Often, auction properties come with surprises. The surprise might be a leak you did not know about. It might be a rotten floor. It might be an old electrical system. It might even be asbestos. It might be a tenant who's left the property in worse condition than expected. It might be that the property has been empty for longer than you thought. You also need to look at the council tax arrangements, whether you are paying double or more because the property has been left vacant for so long. You need to factor that in. So when you calculate your maximum bid, do not use the refurbishment cost you hope for. Use the refurbishment cost you can defend. Third, transaction and holding costs. These are the quiet killers of auction profits. Everyone remembers the purchase price. Most people remember the stamp duty. Fewer people properly account for everything else. At auction, you may have an administration fee. You may have a buyer's premium. You may have search fees. You will have legal fees and possibly the seller's legal fees as well. You may have to complete quickly, which means you may need bridging finance rather than longer term mortgage finance. Then, once you own the property, you have holding costs, interest, insurance, council tax. Now, this may be double or even more, utilities, service charges, ground rents, maintenance, security, and so on. And then there is time. A project that should take 3 months can take 6. A refinance that should take 8 weeks can take longer. A sale can fall through. A tenant issue can delay everything. So, your holding cost calculation needs to include a sensible time allowance. If your numbers only work in perfect timelines, they probably do not work. Fourth, risk allowance. This is where the legal pack comes in. In a previous episode, we talked about using AI to help you read an auction legal pack. Not as a replacement for a solicitor, but as a way of identifying issues quickly and knowing what questions to ask. I've programmed my Claude AI, in fact, I've trained it to actually produce questions to ask the auction house and the solicitor. If you haven't listened to the previous episode, I would recommend that you do. Today, we take that one step further. Once you identify the risks, you need to decide what they are worth. You've got to put a cost on them because a legal risk is not just something to notice, to identify, it's something to price. Let's say the legal pack shows the seller is passing on extra costs to the buyer through the special conditions of sale. That affects your bid. Let's say the title has a restriction that will need resolving. Well, that affects your bid. Let's say there's a short lease. That indeed affects your bid. Let's say there is unclear access, missing rights of way, a restrictive covenant, rent charge, absent freeholder, defective lease plan, unresolved planning issue, or a tenancy you don't fully understand. Well, that all affects your bid. Sometimes the risk means you should walk away, but sometimes the risk simply means you reduce the price. And when there are identifiable risks, it puts the herd off, which gives you another competitive advantage. What we've just covered there is the professional approach to buying properties at auction. You're not trying to find the perfect property at auction. Perfect properties rarely sell at distressed prices. We know by now because it attracts the herd. You are trying to find mispriced risk. We can only benefit from mispriced risk if you know how to price it better than other buyers. Here's a simple way to think about it. Every issue in the legal pack falls into one of 3 categories. First one, it's acceptable and does not materially affect the deal. 2, it's acceptable, but only at a lower price. 3, it is unacceptable and you walk away. The mistake is treating everything as a category 1 because you want to buy the property. The other mistake is treating everything as category 3 because you're scared of complexity. The opportunity is usually in category 2. We look for problem properties where we can fix the issue at either no cost or relatively cheaply. This is where experienced auction buyers often find value. Now back to the list. So the 5th point, your required profit or margin. Many people leave until last, or worse, forget altogether. But your profit is not whatever happens to be left after the deal. It is the return you require for taking the risk, using your capital, arranging finance, managing the project, and dealing with uncertainty. If there is not enough profit in the deal, you shouldn't do it. That might sound obvious, but auctions are emotional environments. People do get excited. They want to win. They've spent time researching the property. They've imagined the finished project. They possibly even psychologically spent the profit. They've told themselves this is the one. And then they overreach. They add another 5,000, then another 5, then another. Before they know it, the profit is gone. They've not bought an investment. They bought themselves a job with a lot of risk attached. So before the auction starts, you decide your required profit. That could be a fixed amount. It could be a percentage of the total costs. It could be a return on cash invested. It depends entirely on your strategy. But it needs to be clear. Because if you don't know your minimum acceptable return, you cannot know your maximum bid. Now, let's put this together. Let's go back to our example. You think the finished property will be worth £240,000. The works will cost £40,000. Stamp duty, legal costs, auction fees, finance, insurance, council tax, utilities, and other costs come to £25,000. So you want a profit of £30,000. You also include a £10,000 risk and contingency allowance. So we take the end value of 240,000. We subtract 40,000 for the works, 25,000 for transaction and holding costs, £30,000 for profit, and £10,000 for risk. That gives us £135,000. That is your maximum bid. Not £150,000 because that was the guide price. Not £160,000 because you think it's still below market value. Not £170,000 because another bidder just pushed it up there. They must know something I don't know. It's £135,000. Because based on your assumptions, that is the highest price that will still give you a return. Or indeed the return you require. Now, some listeners will be thinking, but if the guide is £150,000, I'll never buy it at £135,000. Maybe not, and that's fine. The point is not to buy every property. The point is to buy the right property at the right price. If it sells for £165,000, that does not mean you are wrong. It may mean someone else had a different plan. It may mean they had cheaper finance. It may mean they are an owner-occupier. It may mean they spotted value you missed. It may also mean they overpaid. And in my experience, that is the key issue. I see properties at live auctions racing away because amateur auction buyers just get involved in the moment, the heat of the moment indeed, and they overpay. Don't you overpay. Be disciplined. The key thing is we don't know why a particular property does race away, but I would say the one I've just suggested is probably the main reason. And more importantly, it doesn't really matter to you. Your job is not to match the room or the online bid. Your job is to protect your risk. This is where a lot of investors struggle psychologically. They see a property sell above the maximum bid and they feel like they lost. But you didn't lose. You only lose when you buy badly. Letting someone else overpay is not losing. It's discipline. And discipline is one of the biggest advantages you can have at auction, because the auction room, whether online or in person, is designed to create urgency. There's a countdown. There are other bidders. There's competition. There's scarcity. There's adrenaline. There's the feeling that if you don't bid now, the opportunity disappears. We have very skilled auctioneers on live feeds trying to create the same atmosphere that we once had before COVID-19. That pressure is real, which is why the maximum bid has to be set before the auction. When you are calm, when you have the spreadsheet open, when you've read the legal pack, when you've spoken to your solicitor, when you have checked the comparables, when you have looked at the finance, and when you have thought about what could go wrong. Now, remember, AI can help you with all this. If you listen to my previous episode, there's a bit about AI. I'm doing quite a lot of this now with my mentees, and we are filtering lots very, very quickly and highlighting opportunities simply by training AI to look for particular issues that interest us. So we don't want to be emotional at auction. Here's a practical rule. Write down your maximum bid. Don't just have it in your head. I have it on a sticky on my screen when the auction is live. I have the maximum bid written down on the screen, so I just can't miss it. And psychologically, that has some sort of impact as well. So, for example, maximum bid, £135,000 based on £240,000 gross development value or GDV, 40,000 works, 25,000 costs, 10,000 risk allowance, 30,000 required profit. That note is written down. When the bidding reaches £136,000, you're out. Not because you cannot afford another 1,000, but because the deal has moved outside your rules. And if the rules are sensible, breaking them is not ambitious, it's ill discipline. Now, let's talk about something important. Your maximum bid can change before the auction, but it should only change because the facts have changed. For example, if you receive new information that reduces the risk, you might increase your bid. Maybe your solicitor confirms an issue is not as serious as it first looked. Maybe a contractor gives you a lower and more reliable works estimate. Maybe you discover a stronger comparable sale. Or maybe the seller answers a key question. That can justify changing the number. But what should not change the number is emotion. Not because you like the property, not because you've already spent money on searches, not because you have told a business partner about it, not because bidding is close and you think you might as go one more £1,000. Only facts should move the bid. Now, there's another mistake worth mentioning. Some buyers calculate the maximum bid based on the best case scenario. They assume the works go smoothly, the market stays strong, finance is cheap, and sale is quick, and the legal issue is resolved without delay. That's not a maximum bid. That is a fantasy bid. A proper maximum bid is based on a realistic case with enough margin to survive problems. Auction investing is not about assuming everything goes wrong, but if you assume that, you'll never buy anything. But it's also about accepting that something usually does go wrong. The boiler may cost more, it may even be condemned. The tenant takes longer to leave, or the lender asks more questions, issues with the council, and so on. Something happens. Your margin is what protects you when it does. That is why buying too close to your break-even point is very risky. If your plan only makes money when everything goes perfectly well, then it's not a robust investment. It is a bet really on perfection, and perfection is rare in distressed property. Let's also talk about different strategies, because the maximum bid is not the same for every buyer. A developer, a landlord, trader, owner-occupier, and neighbor may all have different maximum bids for the same property. The developer needs a profit after works and resale. The landlord is focused on the rental yield, and particularly with a BRRR, the refinance value. A trader may want a quick margin by solving a legal or title problem. The owner-occupier may accept a lower financial return because they want somewhere to live. And the neighbor may pay a premium because the property has a special value for them. This is why you cannot simply look at what someone else paid and assume that was the correct price. Their circumstances may be completely different. You need to calculate your number based on your strategy. For a flip, you're usually working backwards from resale value. For a buy-to-let, you may be working from rental income, mortgage stress testing, yield, and refinance valuation. For a lease extension, you need to understand the premium, legal cost, timescale, and uplift, and be completely familiar with the concept of marriage value. For a tenanted property, particularly in the post-May 1st, 2026 Renters' Rights Act environment, you need to understand the tenancy, rent, any arrears, possession risk, and management burden. For a commercial or mixed-use property, you need to understand the lease terms, business rates, VAT, planning use, and investment yield. The method is the same, but the inputs change according to strategy. End value, costs, risks, required return, maximum bid. That is the framework. Now let's bring this back to the legal pack. A lot of buyers read the legal pack as a pass or fail exercise. They ask, is the legal pack okay? But that is not a precise enough question. The better questions are, what obligations am I taking on? What costs are being transferred to me? What could delay completion, resale, letting, or finance? What would a lender dislike? What would a future buyer's solicitor raise? What would it cost to fix this? How long would it take? And does the price compensate me for that? Those questions are much more useful. And in fact, you can train AI to find the answers. And if the answers are not readily available, it will produce an email to send to the auction house to ask those very questions. Because the legal pack is not separate from the bid, it's all part of the bid. If the special conditions add £5,000 of seller's costs, that is not just a legal detail. That is £5,000 less that you can bid. If the lease only has 62 years remaining, that's not just a legal pack detail. That affects value, obtaining finance, and your exit. If there's no clear right of access, again, that's not just a legal pack detail. That may affect whether the property is mortgageable or sellable. If there is a tenant in occupation and the paperwork is complete, and this is a really, really big issue right now in 2026, that again is not just a legal pack issue. that affects control, timing, income, and possession risk. It can be an absolute nightmare if the tenancy documentation is either incorrect or served incorrectly and or late. So the legal pack tells you where the money might leak out of the deal. Your bid needs to basically take this into account. So before we wrap up, this has been a particularly long podcast, but this is a really key issue for you to learn. The maximum bid is crucial to buying property at auction. So here's a simple pre-auction checklist. Now, if you want to go into detail about all this, then by all means, please go to amazon.co.uk and buy my book, which is all laid out with all these checklists. It's bang up to date for 2026, and it's called Property Auctions, Repossessions, Bankruptcies, and Bargain Properties. So, before bidding, you should be able to answer these questions. You ready? What is my realistic end value? What evidence supports that value? What is my works or refurbishment budget? Who has checked it? Has anyone else looked at it? What are my purchase costs? What extra costs are hidden in the special conditions of sale? What are my finance and holding costs? How long could I realistically be holding the property? What are the legal risks? What are the physical risks? What are the planning, tenancy, leasehold, or title risks? What is my exit strategy? What is my required profit? And finally, what is my maximum bid? If you cannot answer those questions, you're not ready to bid. That doesn't mean you need perfect certainty. You'll never have that, particularly at property auctions. But you do need clarity and to know what price makes sense for you and your strategy. Because at auction, the contract is binding. Once the hammer falls or once the online auction ends and you are the successful bidder, you are committed. That is why the work has to be done before the bid, not after. So here's the key takeaway from today's episode. The guide price is not your starting point. The property's value, costs, risks, and required return are your starting point. Your maximum bid is the result of those numbers. And once you have that number, your job is to adhere to it. Because successful auction buyers are not the people who win the most lots. They're the people who buy the right lots at the right price. Sometimes that means bidding confidently. Sometimes it means negotiating after a property fails to sell or before. And sometimes it means doing all the work, watching the auction, and walking straight away. In the old days when we stood in auction rooms in hotels, and when I wasn't successful, my wife would just say, let's go for lunch and celebrate. Initially, I was a bit bemused by the whole thing, but she said it's worth celebrating that you didn't overpay. And she's absolutely right. So walking away from a bad deal is not wasted effort. It's part of the process. Every property you analyze makes you sharper. Every legal pack you read makes you faster. Every auction you watch teaches you where the market really is. And eventually, when the right property appears at the right price, you're ready to attack. You know your number, you understand the risk, you can move quickly, and you can bid with confidence because you're not guessing. This isn't a game for amateurs. You need to know what you're doing. I see people losing money week in, week out, and in some cases, substantially. This is the difference between speculating and investing. So, to finish, remember this. The auction does not reward the person who wants the property most. It rewards the person who understands the risk and prices it properly. So, thanks for listening to the Property Auctions podcast from me, Dominic Farrell of distressedassets.co.uk. As always, this episode is for general information only. It is not legal, financial, tax, or investment advice. Before bidding at auction, speak to qualified professionals, including a solicitor, and where appropriate, a surveyor, broker, or tax advisor. If you found this useful and you want some more insights, then please contact us via our website, or again, please have a look at my book, which is on amazon.co.uk. We also have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@distressed assets, where you'll see some examples of the properties that we have been looking at and buying in recent months. So have a great rest of the day, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you very much for listening. Much appreciated.